Hi, everybody, and welcome to Hell is for Children. This show is on every Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, which is 2100 hours Central European Time. And my name is Geerte Frenken, and this show is all about the topic of protective mothers and their children. So what's a protective mother? A protective mother tries to protect her child or children from their abusive fathers by many means necessary, which is an uphill battle in today's global corrupt family court system that thrives on paternal entitlement. And today's guest is Dr. Debra Wingfield. Dr. Wingfield holds a master's degree in counseling psychology from the University of West Florida and a Doctor of Education degree in counselor education from the University of Northern Colorado and has taught psychology and counseling at Regis University. She developed and taught a domestic violence counselor training curriculum at the University of Southern Colorado. Dr. Debra authored several books, such as From Darkness to Light, Your Inner Journey. That's a workbook to help adults heal from child maltreatment and family violence. She also wrote Through a Child's Voice, Transformational Journaling for Tweens and Up who experience child abuse and family violence. And then she also authored Her Eyes Wide Open, Help with Control Freak Co-Parents, a book that helps protective parents assess and heal from domestic violence and coercive control. Dr. Debra Wingfield has over 40 years of training therapists and counseling children and adults who experience child maltreatment and family violence, and she now educates and trains professionals across multiple disciplines: mental health, advocates, attorneys, and community members on the impacts of domestic violence, coercive control, and family violence. So, welcome to Hell is for Children, Dr. Debra Wingfield.
Thank you, Geerte. I'm honored to be here.
Well, I'm honored to have you on the show, and I'm interested to hear from you to start with. How did you get involved with protective mothers?
Well, that happened about 7 years ago, and I didn't understand what was going on in the family court system because I was a grandmother by that time and was pretty much out of the picture of what was happening. And then my granddaughter came to Colorado to get away from her abusive ex-boyfriend. And while she was here, he came to visit his son, and when she had her back turned, he took the baby and fled back to the state where he lives. And so that has been over 7 years ago now. And I started looking at how I could help her. And as I looked at how I could help her, that's how I came across all the mothers that are also in that same position.
Right, and there's a lot of us.
Yes, there are. So I just started delving into what was going on. Barry Goldstein had a training here in Colorado not long after his first book came out about domestic violence, abuse, and child custody. So I went to that, and it was like my eyes were opened up to what was happening. And I started offering to help protective mothers through Facebook. And then word got out in our local community. I started getting referrals from our shelter, mothers who were looking for help. I get referrals from all over the country. And I work with those mothers on a pro bono basis because I know that they don't have the funds to be able to pay for the help that I can offer. Excuse me. So just to be very clear, I'm not an attorney. I don't have any training in law. What I do help moms do is strategize on their cases, It really helps if I can get involved with them early in their case, even before they actually file, if possible, because when cases have been out there for 2, 3, 5 years, and then we're trying to repair the damage of what has gone on in the court system, it's much more difficult to backtrack because we've already got judges with opinions about both parties in the case. They've been manipulated by the abuser, and we know with abusers they come on as very charming and convincing in a courtroom. And with the protective mom, she's coming across as we would expect her to come across. She's protecting her babies. And I liken it to how a mother bear protects her cubs. And we would not expect a mother bear who sees someone approaching her cubs to just back off and lay down and let someone else come after her cubs.
Ain't gonna happen.
No, she's got her claws out and she's growling and she's ready. So when I try to work with attorneys to help them understand the emotional impact on the mother of having this child ripped away from her or her children ripped away from her, they're like, but we just need the facts. We can't deal with the emotion. And so part of what I do, because of my background in counseling, is I give mothers a place to vent, a place to talk about what happened, to talk about their concerns about their children, so that when they come into the courtroom, they can calmly explain to the judge what's going on, and they can have it put together in such a way that it actually makes sense, rather than when they're talking to me, I understand that they're going to talk to me and it's going to go around in circles and we're going to come back to things and then we're going to go off on a different track, and that's okay. I can follow that. But that doesn't work for judges and attorneys because they're not trained that same way. So part of what I'm advocating for within the professional community is that we have a multidisciplinary team that's working on these cases, so that moms are not just stuck out there trying to figure out how to get through the legal system. And then somebody says, well, you just need to go to therapy. What they need is they need someone who understands what they're going through emotionally and to be able to help them walk down that path in parallel to walking down the legal path.
Right, because the protective mothers are put in a position where they're not only protecting themselves and their children, but they're also completely traumatized from what is the loss of their children, right?
Nice.
So, and then they have to somehow heal and deal with that and figure out, often they're put in a pro se litigation situation, so they're also learning the law. I mean, it's a ridiculously difficult situation to be put in. And I'm all for this idea of a multidisciplinary team, not just to help the mom, but also to assess the case from every angle in a fair, non-biased way that's in-depth enough to recognize what coercive control is and all the dynamics of domestic violence that often happen behind closed doors and are not apparent when you're in a court situation and the father's all dressed up in his suit and, presenting nicely, and, you would never know what he's doing behind closed doors, right?
Exactly. And then to try to describe what's going on behind those closed doors in a way that paints a picture. And one of the things that I offer in my book, Eyes Wide Open, and I'm going to just flip to that right now so people can see where that is. In that book, what I do is I give moms checklists about the different types of coercive control so that they can identify, first of all, what kind of coercive control was used in their relationship. And then I give them journaling clues to work with so that after they've done that identification, then they can talk about how that impacted them, what impact that had on their children, and then how they can heal from that impact. And so we're creating something that I teach professionals where you have to show the context of what was going on, the intent of the abuser. What was the abuser trying to accomplish? Did they want to dominate their partner? Did they want to manipulate their partner to do things the way they wanted them done, even if it didn't make sense to the protective mother? Did they want to do all kinds of things that took away her freedom, her identity, so that he became the only one that she could relate to? So in that book, there's those different sections in the journaling parts after each chapter where a protective mom can actually go through and address those kinds of things on her own or with a therapist or an advocate, someone that's trained to understand what's going on. And in the process of doing that, then be able to create a way to explain that to a judge. Because I've sat in courtrooms where moms have said to the judge, he emotionally abused me. And the judge is looking at her like, okay, so well, maybe he yelled at you a couple of times. Maybe he gave you a dirty look. But the judge doesn't get a clear picture because most of the coercive control tactics also include emotional abuse. But when you start teasing them apart and looking at each one of them, whether it's intimidation or threats or isolation or extensive verbal abuse, then she can explain that context, the intent, and then what she believed that the abuser was trying to do. And because of the way the abuser actually communicates with her, she begins to understand what the abuser's beliefs are. And one of those primary beliefs is ownership. Once you're married to me or once you commit to being in a relationship with me, I own you. You're my property. Any kids we have together are my property, and it's my way or the highway. And I'm sure you've come across that, Geerte.
I'm in the middle of that. I mean, in my particular situation, my ex-husband wasn't really involved with my daughter for many years of her life. And, I don't know what spurred it, but he abducted her through the courts and has cut off all contact. And it's a pattern that I see with thousands of protected mothers. The abusive fathers seem to want to continue to abuse the mothers, their ex-partners. The coercive control is executed by abducting the children through the courtroom, which is domestic violence by proxy. In itself, removing the child from the primary nurturer is extremely damaging to the child. And obviously, it's a way to exact revenge. It's a way to avoid paying child support. And it's a way to continue to abuse and molest the children. And the system is geared to enable this paternal entitlement that you are mentioning, where the fathers are seen as having the right to control their property, exactly as you're verbalizing it.
Yes.
So how can we turn the game around, Debra?
Well, first of all, we have to work with helping women understand what's going on. And in my own history, I was married to 2 abusers before I finally was able to understand what was happening. And I didn't have words to describe it. All I knew is I was unhappy. Those marriages were not working. I didn't feel safe. And there was fear of what my ex-husbands would do. And when I started reading, as I started helping women back in the early 90s about these kind of cases, it was then that I started to realize that it had happened to me as well. And it was like light bulbs going on. So that's one of the reasons why I go so in depth on each one of the coercive control tactics, because until you really understand what the tactics are and then are able to identify how frequently those are used against you, and then look at the severity that increases with that. And many of these relationships never get to physical violence. And so women say, well, I'm not in a domestic violence relationship because he didn't get physical with me. And I have a great example of a woman who was able to write her story and share with me after she was out of the relationship. And one of the things that she told me was he would keep me trapped in the basement for 12 hours at a time, haranguing me, demanding that I tell him I love him in just the right tone of voice, with just the right look in my eyes. And the only thing that he did that was physical was he would hold me up against this filing cabinet so that the handles were sticking me in the back, and just held her by her chest. He didn't actually strike her. So she never thought it was physical abuse until we started talking. And when we have protective moms who have been victimized this way, it's real hard for them to explain that to someone. And then you go talk to someone who's never had that kind of an experience, and they go, I can't imagine someone doing that kind of thing. So therefore, you must be making this all up.
You're bringing up a really good point, because the domestic violence through coercive control and threatening and name calling, emotional and psychological abuse has no physical scars.
Right.
It's in a sense it's easier if you have a black and blue eye, because you can show the world, like, look, I have just been beaten. But you can't evidence the psychological and emotional abuse and the coercive control. So what I understand from the book that you wrote is a tool to start documenting the way the coercive control and the emotional psychological abuse took place while the marriage was still intact, so to speak.
Right. And that's the first part of it. And then because it continues past the ending of the relationship, after separation, after divorce, I see it going on 10 years down the road, and it's still happening. So there's also, with the tools in that book, a way to identify what's continuing to occur and how frequently that happens. And one of the things that we do know is that when abusers don't have access directly to their victims, what they'll do is they may use some of the same tactics, but they also could switch tactics and use different tactics. So the checklists that are in the book actually allow the protective mom to look through each one and all the different examples. And I know that when I put those checklists together, I didn't get every single type of tactic that an abuser uses in those checklists. So that would make probably a volume that was this thick if we were doing
yeah, that would be the Bible of hell, the domestic terrorist hell.
Exactly.
Too many chapters in that one.
So again, what I do is I give the reader an opportunity to document what's going on specifically in their situation. And part of what we have to do for the court is we have to describe behaviorally specific instances of these kinds of situations, because the court is saying, well, we're incident based. When did this incident happen and how often did it happen? And she's going like, I don't know how often it happened, because it seemed like every time I turned around, something was going on. So we want to help the protective moms actually be able to create that behavioral descriptive trail that they can take into court. So instead of saying, I was emotionally abused in this relationship, she can describe exactly how she was emotionally abused and that pattern of coercive control that was continually used throughout the relationship. And I have to give Evan Stark a big plug here, because he wrote a wonderful book on coercive control. And his book really helps the professionals to understand the dynamics and the underpinnings of coercive control. And coercive control is a pattern of behavior. It's not an incident by incident piece. So if an abuser starts out very low key with maybe using the silent treatment, if the mom doesn't do what he wants her to do, so he starts just not talking to her for a few days. And one of the worst cases I ran across of that was before I ever knew anything about domestic violence. And I went to dinner with my ex-husband when we were still married. And we visited with a friend of ours, and her husband was supposed to be there for dinner. And when we arrived, I said, so where's your husband? And she said, well, I don't know if he'll be here or not. And I said, what do you mean you don't know? And she says, well, he hasn't talked to me for 6 months.
Oh.
And it was something that she had done that he didn't like with her son and her ex-husband. And so she said, I don't know if he'll show up or not. And if he doesn't, just the three of us will have dinner. Well, he did show up, and it was very apparent that he was not communicating with her. He communicated with me, he communicated with my husband, and he totally ignored her. And it was a very uncomfortable evening. But it can be that simple a behavior that she goes, okay, I must have done something wrong here. I've got to figure this out. He's blaming me, and he's letting me know how upset he is with me, how angry he is with me. And she doesn't know what else to do.
So the book that you wrote, in a sense, then also is a way for the protective mothers to become self-aware of that blaming, because obviously they have no guilt in this and there is no blame, but they need to become aware of the fact that that type of behavior is trying to make them feel that it's geared to break down the self-esteem that they have, so to control. Is used to increase the deterioration of the self-esteem of the mom. And becoming aware of that and it being empowered is extremely important in identifying the behavior and then confronting the abuser, or well, what should we do?
Well, confronting the abuser usually tends to escalate the abuser, whereas once the protective mother or even the woman before she has children starts to identify these kinds of behaviors, then that's where she needs to be reaching out for help outside of their relationship. And I'm going to put a little caveat in here, because typically the first person that someone will think about to reach out to for help is either a family member or a clergy person. And family members don't understand it, especially if they've never gone through it, they've never experienced these kinds of things. So they'll tell her, well, it can't be that bad. You just have to go home and fix it with him. And what we find with clergy is they don't understand what's going on. And they'll say, well, we just need to bring the two of you in for marriage counseling. And that just gives him a whole another tactic to use, because we see abusers use spiritual abuse in many different forms, very often using their church as a way to convince the woman that she has to be submissive, and they'll misquote the Bible, or they'll take things out of context in the Bible and then say that's the gospel, you have to do this way. And so she gets her world narrower and narrower and narrower.
Yes, one of the tools that the coercive controlling fathers use is isolating the victim, which can be done through religious communities. We've had Coral Anacathiel on the show, and she explained how that was done in her particular family situation. But these abusers will also go after direct family members. In my particular case, my ex-husband would contact my own mother and say, Geerte has really changed. You know, he would try and get access to her and convince her that something was wrong with me. So they go and in a systematic way, they approach everyone around the victim to convince them that the mother is crazy or dangerous or both. They recruit flying monkeys, people who will help them in that process to isolate the victim.
That's very, very true. And I can cite a situation that happened in my first marriage where my first husband couldn't control me. He actually wrestled me to the floor, and he was trying to spank me, and I got away from him. And the next thing I knew, he was on the phone to my father, asking my father, how do you control your daughter? And I was so close to leaving before that. And that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. And it was right after that I started looking for legal help. We now have many resources across the globe for women. There are advocates, there are shelters. And even if a woman doesn't want to go into a shelter, the shelters have outreach programs, so women can go there and talk with someone at the shelter and find out what her options are. Law enforcement, depending on the community, may have an advocate actually working as part of the law enforcement system that can point her towards resources. And then we have tons of resources online now that we didn't have back in the 70s when I was going through this.
Well, one of the issues is, though, that police officers and people working at domestic violence shelters also need to be aware of what coercive control and emotional and psychological abuse is, and how these obsessed abusers, what their tactics are, because they're so incredibly subtle in a sense, and in another sense they're not, but they also have to learn to recognize the symptoms in order to be able to refer the mother to the appropriate help. So I understand that you're also working on training professionals in the field to become more aware of these symptoms. Is that correct?
That is correct. In fact, later this month, I will be traveling to another part of the state that I live in, because they have new advocates in their shelter program. They have new advocates in their CASA program, which is the Advocates for Children. They have new attorneys in their district attorney's office. And so I will be spending 2 days talking with them about coercive control and the dynamics that go on in these families, and hopefully be able to get them to take part in even more training.
Very good. Yeah, I want to share my screen for a second and show the audience that these particular obsessed abusers actually work together in fathers' rights groups to abuse their ex-partners by taking the children, and they do that through the grooming of the people who are part of the system. This is a wonderful website that explains the fine art of grooming, of institutional grooming. So how law enforcement is recruited by the obsessed abuser, how even domestic violence shelters are recruited by domestic violence inflictors. The perpetrators will go out of their way, like you said, to isolate the victim, and they'll go as far as calling every attorney in their area to make sure that when the mother calls for legal help, there's a conflict of interest and she's cut off from legal help. They will go as far as recruiting the clerk at the court. Everyone in the area, the schools, the doctors, the dentists, and this is a way for the mother to be cut off from contact from the children. We also call it vengeful father syndrome. If you go here to the Mothers of Lost Children's page, there's a wonderful article here about vengeful father syndrome. And I like this quote from Coral Anacathiel, forcibly taking a mother's children and then controlling her emotionally by withholding contact must be publicly recognized as one of the greatest forms of misuse of the American justice system and one of the greatest hidden vehicles for widespread socially approved physical and emotional abuse and control. This is really important for the folks who are working in the system to realize that this is also one way for them to recognize that they're dealing with an abuser. When I call the domestic violence shelter in Marin County, where my issue is happening, and I mention that the father of my daughter has not allowed any contact between me and my daughter for about 1.5 years now, they should immediately understand that this is a case of maternal deprivation, which is a very, very damaging child abuse, form of child abuse. Severing the mother-child bond is one of the worst things you can do, as you can see here. You can kill the children, but actually this type of severing of the mother-child bond can also lead to suicide, both of the mothers and the children. But we would preferably want to prevent the mothers from getting into the situation that I'm in, where my situation has escalated out of control. And I wish I had known you 7 years ago, which is when the real abuse started, which is interesting because, yes, the abuse started during the marriage, which is the reason why I separated and then divorced. But the actual real damage that was done started occurring, of course, when my ex-husband started molesting and abusing my daughter. But once it started going into the legal abuse, that's when it also started going into areas of financial abuse, legal abuse, losing, you end up losing your house and your job, and they'll go after every aspect of your life, because the ultimate goal is for the victim to kill herself, so it seems. Which unfortunately we had 2 protective mothers commit suicide 2 weeks ago. And, for all the mothers that are watching, let this be your motto, not over my dead body, right? But like you said, the abuse actually continues after the divorce, which is, can you explain us why the obsessed abuser can't let go of the fact that the relationship is over?
Well, for the abuser, the relationship is sometimes their means of survival. They don't feel like they can function without this other person in their life. And I actually explain this in the first book, From Darkness to Light, where I talk about how the abuser actually doesn't have a fully developed personality of their own. And I use an old theory that still makes a lot of sense to me. It's transactional analysis. And every person, according to transactional analysis, has a parent, adult, and child part of their personality. And when 2 people come together and one person has a deficit in one of those areas, maybe the child part of their personality is very small, whereas the parent part of their personality is large, and then their adult part of their personality is actually, and I'm trying to make circles here, I don't know if you can see those, is a little bit smaller, so that they start taking over the parts of the personality in their partner that are not working for them, and they want to shape that to try to make it work for themselves. And in the process of doing that, instead of having 2 separate individuals who can work autonomously and work interpersonally, what we end up with is a symbiotic relationship. And when we have that kind of symbiotic relationship, then you pull part of that relationship piece away. The abuser still can't function because they needed that other part of the personality. I can think of a case right now where his motivation is survival. He can't operate on his own. So when the protective mother, who is the person who actually functions well on her own, starts to suggest things to actually create a more cohesive structure for the children so they understand what's going on, what he does is he attacks back because he can't even begin to understand what she's suggesting, first of all, and then he doesn't understand how he would implement that in his life. So he starts talking to her like she's crazy and blaming her and saying, you're going to make the kids not like you even more by doing this, when all she's doing is trying to do what's best for children which is to give them a structure so that they know what they can count on every day of every week.
Yeah, there's interesting, because it kind of brings me back to where if I look at my own particular experience with this, my ex was able to cover up this dynamics for 4 years. It's incredible to what lengths they will go to put on the mask to cover up for the deficiency. Once I actually confronted him on, hey, maybe you should work on X, Y, and Z that has happened to you in the past since you're becoming a father. I mean, I was pregnant at the time. That was the turning point. That's when he flipped. That's when the mask came off, and I set the bear loose, so to speak. So these are usually people who are not interested in working on their own development, so it seems, because that would be too confrontational with the fact that they haven't processed their past. Would that be a good assessment, a fair assessment?
That would be part of it, that they haven't confronted their past. The other thing is we have to look at how we're socialized. And we are still in a situation where if you go in and you're a male and you're talking to a counselor or you're talking to a psychiatrist about depression, that's not okay. If you go in and you talk about you're angry as a male, then that's more acceptable. So what we have to do is we have a whole generation to create socialization for, where we're actually socializing our boys and our men to be connected with their feelings. And when we're not connected with our feelings, then we tend to lash out with whatever tools we've learned over the years, and very often those are ineffective tools. And when I was actually doing treatment with perpetrators, so I've kind of gone the gamut. I've worked with children and victims and perpetrators. And when I was working with them, some of them actually started to get in touch with what the true pain that they were feeling was. But in order to get to that group, they had to be court ordered. They weren't coming in voluntarily, even though we've been doing those groups now for a very long time. We very seldom see a man volunteer to come into a group. Now, they will come into a group in kind of one backdoor way. So they get in trouble with the law. They go to the attorney. The attorney says, before we even go to court, you need to volunteer to go to this group. And that will just show the judge that you're already taking a proactive stance on this.
And are these like anger management courses, or what's the name for these type of groups?
They're batterer intervention groups. Anger management does not work for true coercive controllers. Anger management really actually works for situational couple violence, where maybe a couple has an argument and it escalates and it's never gone to a physical point, but all of a sudden it goes to a physical point. And law enforcement gets called and he gets arrested and he gets sent to a group, whether it's a batterer's intervention group or an anger management group.
I don't really like the name batterer's intervention, simply because what we just discussed is that much of the abuse is actually not physical battering. We need to figure out a new name for that. But from what I'm understanding, is what you're saying is like we need to actually start in kindergarten and primary schools and teach particularly the boys to talk about their feelings, so they can get in touch and at least verbalize, instead of lashing out, being able to verbalize and say, I feel angry. I mean, we need to get to that kind of a basic, development of our educational program, starting at a very young age, and making sure that we don't shame the boys for talking about their feelings. I mean, that it's a societal and cultural thing in that sense. But a true sociopath doesn't, from what I understand, there's no way that they can, there's no healing, because it's an actual brain dysfunction, not even a disorder. There's a certain part of their brain that's simply not working. The parts that has supposed to have empathy. There's no electrical activity in that brain when they scan the brains with an MRI, for example. So what do you do with a sociopath in these types of settings?
Well, one of the things that we've done in Colorado, which is the state where I am, is we've actually divided our treatment programs into 3 different levels. So the level A person that ends up in that group is usually someone who's coming out of a situational couples violence situation. Someone who's in a level B or C is coming out of a coercive controlling violence situation, where that's their primary focus. Now, I'm going to back up with you for a minute here before I answer your question. With situational couple violence, when we talk to the victim in that situation, very often she will not say, I'm afraid of him. There's no fear. It was just like, I don't know where it came from. And I feel safe with this person. When we start talking about coercive controlling violence, then we start getting from the victim the fear. I'm afraid of him. I'm afraid to leave. I'm afraid to stay. And then women who end up with the sociopath, as you're calling it, it's antisocial personality disorder at this point in the DSM-5. Those individuals, when you talk to the woman, she's in utter terror. She is terrified of what he will do next. And so that middle person, which is a level B person, we can reach that person. And very often they'll acknowledge what's happened in their childhood and how they were exposed to violence there. And then we give them tools and skills that they can use and help them go through that change process, so that those are not people that come back to these groups over and over and over again. The people.
Yeah, I understand the tiers that you've kind of set the levels, but I also want to point out that some of this is not necessarily a static issue, that some people who might be coercive controllers can actually escalate to become more sociopathic, so to speak. For example, if they start doing certain hard drugs that will, erode the little bit of empathy that was still there, for example. It's a dynamic process, because in the case of my ex-husband, it was just deteriorating over time. So would you think that, because in divorce court, they always use the term high conflict divorce, which I think is an inappropriate term for when you're dealing with an obsessed abuser. When you're dealing with someone who has antisocial personality disorder, that label doesn't work, because high conflict would suggest that there are 2 partners equally engaging in a conflict, whereas when you're dealing with an obsessed abuser, there's actually one individual who is inflicting abuse 100% on the other one. And it's usually empathy versus antisocial dynamics, right? You have the narcissist, or the someone who's going into the antisocial personality disorder realm, versus the person who has a lot of empathy, right? These are usually the two puzzle pieces that the way they click. So that's not a high conflict divorce.
No, and I like Barry Goldstein's term for it. He calls them domestic violence divorces, because it really has to do with coercive control, which is the primary focus of domestic violence, and physical violence is just a small piece of that. And so when you have a domestic violence divorce, you are not having a divorce where two people can actually be taught how to co-parent. There is no co-parenting in these divorces. And that's one of the things that I talk with protective moms about. He's not going to co-parent with you. He's not going to support you. He's going to do his own thing, and you do your own thing. And so we call that parallel parenting. And when I've worked with moms who say, it's got to be very confusing for my child to have one set of rules in my home, and then they go to his home and they have a totally different set of rules. And I say, yes, I understand that. And it can be very difficult for a child to make that adjustment. However, one of the things that does, if you can help your child with this, is it builds resilience skills in the child. Because when we get out in the world, as you know, Geerte, we work in environments with all kinds of people. And when we're working with different people, we have to adjust to the way that they work. You know, we don't start out in the workplace at the top of the heap. We start down at the bottom, and we have to work our way up. And in the meantime, we're working with managers and supervisors and people who are telling us how to do our job. And we might have a supervisor that tells us how to do our job, and then a month later that person quits and we get a new supervisor in, and they say, oh, well, we're going to do it this way because I'm the supervisor now. And if children grow up with there's only one way to live life and there's only one way to do things, then what they're going to do when they get out on the job is they're not going to be able to adjust to that. So what I tell protective moms to think about is to explain to their children that not every person that you're going to come across in your lifetime is going to have the same way of handling things. And so what you're learning from your dad may be one way of handling things, and what you're learning from me is a different way of handling things. And as you grow up, you're going to have the ability to have more versatility across working with different people because you're getting those different ways of handling things. So instead of it being these parents that are constantly butting heads over that kind of stuff, I say parallel parent and help your child understand that things happen differently in our home, and we have different traditions in our home. And when you go to dad's house, dad has different ways of doing things and different traditions. And,
right. And when they're adults, they can make their own choices and take the things that they liked from either parent and, you know, form it into their own form of parenting.
Right. So we have those kinds of things that we can shift and reframe that for a mom. So instead of her saying, well, he won't ground the child from their cell phone when they're with him, and as far as I'm concerned, they only need a cell phone when they're talking to him on the phone. Otherwise, they should be connected with me. And I say, well, that's your rule at your house. And it's okay to have your rule at your house. And when they go to dad's house, he can have a different rule around the cell phone. And that's one of the reasons I I try to discourage parents, first of all, even if they're together with their children, to not do grounding, because grounding doesn't work with kids. All it does is ground the parents. And so if you've ever grounded your child, you know, geez, well, now I can't go out because my child's grounded. And if I'm not here to monitor what they're doing, then who knows what they're going to be doing.
Well, it's
So,
also not a way to, it's not a respectful way to raise children anyway. It doesn't, I believe more in exploring why the child is being resistant rather than punishing or rewarding. But that's my personal view. Let's get on to the next particular topic, though, because I understand what you're saying, but now let's bring this to the courtroom, because here we are in front of the judge. I was in a hearing just this week, and and last week as well, and this judge is like handling like 15 cases in 45 minutes. I mean, it was just like, it was like being in a factory. The speed at which she worked and the way people were moving in and out of the courtroom was incredible. So apparently the judge only has a few minutes to look at each case, to look at the file in front of her or him and make some kind of decision, allowing both parties to say one or two things, and usually they've already made up their minds before they even get to the courtroom. So how can we get this out there clear? One of the things you've explained is, okay, we need to journal, and we need to learn to verbalize it within the court documents that we're filing with evidence. So we need to record conversations and have emails that are proof of coercive control, any other type of documentation to submit as evidence to motions. What else can we do in the particular courtroom besides those two things?
okay, I think one of the things is how protective mothers can come across in the courtroom. And I've actually talked with judges who are friends of mine, and we've talked about how women are perceived in the courtroom versus how men are perceived. And women are perceived as not having as much credibility as men. And we haven't figured out why. But what you can do to create more credibility is to be very organized and to be able to walk through things step by step chronologically. Attorneys and judges are taught to be very left brain factual. They don't want to know anything about the emotional piece. That doesn't help them make a decision. They want facts, and then they want evidence to support those facts. And the evidence can be emails. There's a program called Talking Parents that a lot of the judges are requiring parents to use to communicate, where a judge can actually go in and verify something that has been presented to them in court that was written on Talking Parents. And I like that program from the standpoint that once an entry is made into that, neither party can go in and change that. So say that the father comes into court and they've pulled off a thread conversation in Talking Parents, and they're presenting it to the judge. And they're saying, look at what she said to me in here. Well, once you can actually pull those posts off and actually create a document out of those. And that you can actually modify and adjust. Well, if she can come in, the mom comes in and she says, that's not what was in Talking Parents. This is what was in Talking Parents. And she has her own piece that she's pulled off of there. And the judge says, I don't know which one of you is telling me the truth. But the judge is given the password to that particular account, and that the judge is the only one who's given that password. And the judge can go in there and verify which one is correct. So that's good evidence.
I like the system, but I also feel like, oh my God, we got the judge as big brother's watching you in every aspect of your life now, and I really don't like it. Where this is going, but I see what you're saying, though, and I think it's within the family court system that's currently here, I think it's very helpful, but I believe that we should get rid of the family court system altogether. Unfortunately, we're not at that point yet where it's abolished yet, so here we are dealing with family court. And let's go on with that particular topic. So let's move it along to where the mother has lost custody of the child or children to the abusive father. So here she is in court. She's got PTSD, which means that in most cases the moms have a very hard time being organized, as you just explained. I just recently talked to a protective mother who I noticed that her brain was just firing in every direction at the same time almost. It was like fireworks. So it was very hard to keep her on track on one aspect of the case that she was in, and I recognize it because my brain wants to do it too, but I'm aware of it. So, unfortunately, fortunately, I'm able to understand how my brain's responding and what I can do about it. But not all the moms are capable of separating out the emotion from what's happening. So. What can the moms do? I mean, we have PTSD going on, and one of the main things that I'm trying to do is prevent suicides, because I understand the moms are frustrated. They're not being taken seriously. They're being made out to be liars. There are false allegations against them. They're made out to be crazy without any evidence, and they're in court and not able to be heard, because they also have a hard time verbalizing what they're going through because of the PTSD. So it's like a double whammy. What can we do to, well, I mean, you talked about the multidisciplinary team that needs to really look at what's in the actual best interest of the child without looking at it as a he said, she said, where we have a perpetrator and a victim, but it's looked at as an ex-husband and ex-wife. Those are two actual real different situations. But what can we do to get the moms help in these situations?
Well, the first thing that I would recommend is that the mom find a therapist that can either understand what's going on, or that they can actually refer the therapist to start with my book, reading my book. And I do have a number of therapists that have gone out and bought the book when they've heard about it because they don't understand it, and it's been very helpful for them. And then I do consultation with therapists to help therapists understand what's happening. And I also, when I work with moms, I'll work with them to say, okay, now, right now, you're in a situation where we have to focus on what's going to happen in court. And I know that there's a lot of emotional stuff going on. So we're going to set aside this time where you're going to just vent. And I'm going to listen, and I'm going to just let you talk about what you need to talk about. And then out of that, we're going to figure out what the points are that you need to bring up. And one of the ways that I help moms do that is I say, send me an email. Tell me everything in that email that you want to say to your ex-husband about the situation and how you want it to go in court. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to tease out of that email the facts that you need to bring up in court. And then we're going to figure out what the evidence is to support those facts. So instead of leaving it all on the mom, because I know she's firing on so many different channels at the same time. I want to be there to help her get organized, to be able to walk through things. And what I've experienced with moms over time is when they just need that chance to just, oh, I got to just tell you what happened. And it may be 30 minutes, it may be an hour that we go on and she's just telling me what's happened. And then we come up with a solution. And many therapists are trained that we have to solve the problem immediately. And with PTSD, if you don't allow the emotional piece to come out first, then there's no problem solving that can occur. So sometimes I don't have conversations with people. I just have emails back and forth. Or I might get messages on Facebook, private messages. And those are helpful because I'm able to sit back and be objective with that. Now, I'm not the only person that can do that. There are other people that can do that and have stepped up and offered to do that. What we need is, now we need to be able to demonstrate how many advocates that are trained in this are needed so we can actually get the support to pay the advocates, because there are a lot of unpaid advocates out there doing this job.
Yeah, I actually do that myself. I mean, I have a lot of conversations on Facebook with moms who are really struggling. And, you know, when I struggle, I talk to them as well. But you know, we need to help them, but we're offering it too. So for the ones that are offering it, it would be good if there was a way that we can actually unite and bring some kind of program to the front. I know that Patrice Lenowitz does something in that direction. She has this organization called Nurtured Parents, and those are kind of like meetings where the moms meet on a weekly basis and talk about what's going on with them, whatever aspect that they're dealing with, whether it's a legal situation that they're in or an emotional issue regarding their situation. So that would also be a way forward. I find the Facebook medium is really good for supporting each other emotionally in this way. It gives you a chance to read and think about what you're reading and allow it to process it before responding. And you're interacting, which is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we need more advocates in this direction, and we need to find a way for them to also get paid for what they're doing, because it's a lot of volunteer work like what you're doing. And by the way, I want to commend you for offering your work on a pro bono basis. That is incredibly awesome. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad that I'm in a position at this point in my life where I can do that. And, you know, hopefully the trainings that I do with the professionals will provide sufficient income to allow me to continue to do that. And one of my goals is actually to create enough advocates that are out there that we can actually go after funding for that, whether it's private funding or federal, state funding, to be able to support that. Because even our shelter people who are advocates understand the issues, but they're so overwhelmed with just the immediate crises that they can't handle these kind of cases. Because as you know, they can take a number of years to resolve.
Yeah, we need our own toll-free number with a couple of experienced protective mothers who've gone through this and understand every end of it, who can respond to issues to prevent suicide and to prevent escalation of cases as well. Right. Phone numbers where the folks who are answering the phones have the contact information of people who might possibly be able to help or can refer onwards. This is the direction that I'm thinking in. And you and I also discussed possibly doing webinars and training professionals to recognize what coercive controllers are doing within relationships and beyond the relationships in family court. We need to train everyone involved in family court, including Child Protective Services, who's simply not aware of this. Are you looking at what these professionals currently are learning within their training, within their education?
I have looked at some of it. I've talked with people in those systems, and they're not getting even the tip of the iceberg. And I happened to be at a symposium earlier this week where there was a law school professor there, and we were talking afterwards about what I teach, and she says, well, we need people to teach about domestic violence. And she actually caught herself and said, you know, when I teach family law, even though I know a lot about domestic violence because she came up as an advocate originally, she says, I don't teach that in my courses. And I said, I can come into your courses and I can teach about coercive control, about family violence, what's going on.
Well, since you and I teach at the college and university level, maybe we can come up with a training and some PowerPoints and some movie recorded material in which we can train law students to become aware of how these obsessed abusers will act out within marriages and divorce situations and custody battles, and also add sociology and psychology educational programs for future social workers to train them, because they seem to be making catastrophic amounts of horrific mistakes within family situations, even leading to, like I said, suicides and murder. Those be the most extreme effects of domestic violence or domestic violence by proxy. But there are entire Facebook groups on social workers who are just failing to understand the dynamics of what's going on and making horrific decisions. Let's talk about how the children that are held hostage by these abusive fathers can be recognized within the school system or extracurricular activities that they attend for society to understand and help them. I'm thinking about my own daughter. She's in another country, right? I'm in the Netherlands. She's in California. And she's held hostage. She's not allowed any contact with me or her grandmother, the rest of her family and friends here in the Netherlands. And I'm sure there's people around her who understand some of it or know some of it. Mm-hmm. What can the children do, and what can the people around them do to help these children? Do you have any information on that?
Well, let's kind of back up a little bit, and I'm going to see about sharing my screen here. And I just want to get to an article here.
So you got to click share screen and then start sharing screen.
Yeah, I needed to find the tab first to do that. So there we go. So Emma Katz is actually in the United Kingdom, and her focus in her research is children who have been involved with coercive control in their families. And she has numerous articles. This is just one of those where she's looking at the impact on children. And the impact on children is so deep that one of the things that we have to remember is that it's not just cured overnight. And children are not necessarily going to be revealing these kinds of things when they're in school. But we actually have to help children by starting very young. So before they even hit school, we need those early childhood education courses to be teaching about toxic stress. And there's many research articles that have been done now through Harvard University in their Office of Early Childhood Development. And they talk about the impact of toxic stress on a child. So let's kind of back up and look at what does that child look like in a toxic stress situation. Mom is being berated by dad. She's being cut down verbally, emotionally, and the child is sitting in the room. And if the child gets up to leave, dad says, you stay here, you need to learn what your mother's doing wrong. So we're already teaching the child that mother's a bad mother, that mother does things wrong, that she's intellectually challenged is basically the message that's getting to the child. And the child is sitting there taking that all in while this is going on. Now, as a mother and as a protective mother, what I would want to do is I would want to just stop him dead in his tracks and go over and put my arms around my child and nurture my child. And that switches toxic stress to tolerable stress. But the coercive controller has no interest in me paying any attention to my child. All they're interested is in demeaning me, discounting me, berating me, degrading me, anything that they can think of that pops into their brain. And so the child is just taking all this in. And what that's doing to their nervous system, so now we're looking at their brain as well as just their physical body, is they're starting to shake and tremble because they have to have some way to take care of themselves. Nobody is taking care of them. Now, we'll see older children try to care for younger children, and they're not fully equipped to do that either. So when we get that child out of that situation and into a nurturing situation with mother can go back and start helping to repair that damage with the child and actually help that child understand that not everything that daddy was saying may have made sense to them, and it may have hurt them, and they may need to talk about that. They may need to just cry about that because it hurts their heart. And we know that there's a real direct connection with the heart and the brain now as far as what it does to an individual. And then he goes to court, he gets custody of that child, and he gives the child the opposite message and continues to brainwash the child how terrible this mother is and all these bad things that she's done and why the child should be with him all the time and should have nothing to do with mother. And he works on that child's brain and gives them a lot of distorted information. So the child comes back and starts acting out towards mother because now father's got this hold with a child in a captive audience. So they're starting to create what we call Stockholm syndrome in the child. And pretty soon the child's going, I don't want to have anything to do with mother. I just want to go be with dad. And you and I know multiple people on Facebook who have gone through that kind of situation. And what I will say to mothers is even though you don't think that your children will ever come back to you, and some of them may not, it's not worth giving up on your own life, because you never know what will happen with that child. And when that child may get some messages from a therapist, from a partner in a relationship that helps them understand what was going on and will turn them around. So I know it's a glimmer of hope. Yeah, and I always say suicide is never an option, because what your child loses that they could have back, even in their 30s and 40s, is worth staying around for.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. This too shall pass is one of my mottos. And from other therapists that I've talked to, I also understand that when the children become parents themselves in adulthood, often they will start processing their own childhood. And at that point, a lot of healing can occur again. And a reunion might be possible at that point. It might be an opening to a new start that you might have with your child. And of course, the stolen time and the stolen development is not returned. However, it is a chance to heal and reconnect, and that's ultimately what we all want. I think it's incredibly important to be around for your child when they get to that point, and hopefully they will. Now, if there are children watching this program right now who are being held hostage by their fathers, what would you say to them regarding the toxic messages that they're being told about their mothers?
My recommendation for children is to find a safe adult that they can talk with. You know, sometimes there's a school counselor that has not been influenced by their father in a way to destroy any of their concerns. Sometimes there's a teacher that can stand up and be that person for them. There may be another family member that doesn't want to challenge the father, but will provide that nurturing for that child. So find another adult to look up to. And at the same time, be careful. Be careful who you reach out to, because sometimes adults who are predators are looking for vulnerable children to then take advantage of. And if you've been abused by a parent, and specifically in this case your father, if you go find, say, another male role model, that person may not be the person that you believe they are. So be cautious. Maybe one of your friend's parents can be there for you and can support you and help you.
I think that is wonderful advice. I think the parents of a friend can be of crucial importance to children in these types of hostage situations. For any children who are watching, that would be my advice, to find a trusted parent of a friend that you have, someone who you can confide in on a regular basis, and someone hopefully who would be willing to help you deal with the situation in regards to law enforcement or authorities, or the system that has to step up if you're being abused, if you're being molested. We need to know, people around you need to know that it's happening in order to stop it. And so find someone who you can trust, who is willing to do that for you. And you have to kind of feel that out. Maybe you can go and ask, like, hey, if you knew a child that was abused, what would you do? Kind of ask a general question just to see where they're at and what they would do. And if they would say, like, well, I wouldn't get involved, I wouldn't want to have anything to do with it, then that wouldn't be the right person to disclose to, right? So you can kind of feel that out, and that would be the homework that I would give you all, if you're watching this. Another thing that I always share on my shows is, when it comes to the children, is to really think for yourself. Go back to your memories of your mom and feel what it was like to be with her. Did you feel afraid? Did you feel like your mom was dangerous or crazy? If not, then stay with that feeling, because that is true to you. And that wasn't put into your head by someone else, whether it's the father or what we call their flying monkeys, right? The people that believe the nonsense that he's spouting. Think for yourself, stay with your heart. Your intuition is the best compass. It will tell you what's true and what's not true. And it's your most important life experience right now, is to be centered in your own truth. So that's kind of my addition to what you're sharing here for the children. Now, let's talk about that healing journey. Let's say the mothers, the protective mothers and the children have been separated from each other for a long time, maybe 1 year, maybe 2 years, maybe even more. And there comes a point where eventually all these cases stop going on because the children will age out of the system, or something else will happen that will unravel the situation. And now the protective mothers and the children are reunited. What does that healing journey look like? What does that reunion look like? And what should mothers and children be thinking about as they go through that part?
Well, I think that's an important area that we need to address, because when children do come back after they've been with the abuser, they've been brainwashed by the abuser, they're not going to just come back and be that same child that left that protective mother. They are different, and it's going to take time for them to make that adjustment. And if the father is still in the picture, even on a minimal basis, it's going to take even longer for that adjustment to occur. So what I tell mothers to do is to take it slow. Give their children space to get readjusted to living in their home, to their own space, their own room. If counseling is available, I definitely recommend that mothers go with their children to counseling, that they take their children and let their children have time alone with the counselor to talk about what's happened, and then allow the children to rebond with them. And that bonding process can occur more often through age-appropriate activities for the children. So I have one mom that she was going to just sit down and start talking to her child about everything that was misinformation that the child had received from father. And I said, that's not going to work, because father's been doing that with her, and he's been lecturing to her. So what you need to do is you need to take the child and engage in activities that are age appropriate for the child, whether it's sitting at home and watching a movie and eating a bowl of popcorn together. And kids do much better in talking through things if there are other things kind of going on. And I know we've gotten away from board games, but if you can bring your child back to board games, and I did see something that was uplifting for me, is that board games are starting to come back again. Video games are kind of like, okay, well, it's the same old thing. You play the game and then you get a level, and so there's no challenge to it. And so as you get back to doing board games or even card games where you can play card games that are age appropriate for your children, getting outside with them and playing, whether it's going to a playground or going to an activity that might involve other moms and their kids, something that the child can just be with you without having to have you be the center of their attention. And they're just hanging out. And if they've been involved in any kind of activities, any kind of lessons with you in the past, make sure to pick those up again. If they've been involved with church groups, take them to those church groups. Let them reconnect with their life that they have with you on as many different levels as possible. And then conversations happen out of the blue. And it doesn't matter how old the child is. They still have this tendency when they're with a parent to not want to have these direct, intense conversations, especially when they're teenagers. You think, oh, now they've got great verbal skills. We can sit down and we can have a regular conversation about something. And they're all like, oh no, what are my friends doing? What's going on TV? What games can we play on? And so they're not engaging directly. So we have to allow that engagement to occur in a natural setting where we're not trying to contrive that.
Let's not control them. They've just been dealing with worse control. All right. Hold on. My phone sometimes has issues. But there we go. But yeah, so my point was, let's not have them deal with more control. I think that's a really good point. Allow the contact to unfold naturally and insert it at the moments that it's appropriate. Just allow life to unfold. There are also therapists who say that no therapy at all. Don't even delve into all of this with the kids unless they want that themselves. I don't know if there's a set formula, a cookie cutter solution. I guess what we need to do as moms is to kind of just take it per child and per situation to make these types of decisions. But I'm glad that you are here for the mothers in this pro bono fashion for us to consult with you. Can you share your screen with the audience and show how Protective Mothers can get in touch with you?
Okay. I will do that. I have a website. The website is houseofpeacepubs.com, and I have a contact form on that website. Mothers can put in their first and last name, and if you don't want to give me your last name, you can put in a fake last name. I've had people that I've met that totally disguise their name. I'm not concerned about that. Your email address so that we can speak by email, and then you can send your comments to me directly, or you can click on the button below and use your own email program. It's strictly up to you. And
maybe I can add something here for the mothers who are still involved in abusive situations or in these types of hostage holding situations, and they're worried that they're being hacked, possibly remotely. Make a Proton Mail account, Proton Mail. It's a Swiss encrypted cloud server. It cannot be hacked or tracked. And then that would be a way for you to get in touch with Dr. Debra in a safe way and have these very intimate personal conversations with Dr. Debra in a way that cannot be used against you by the abusive, controlling father.
And Geerte, you make a really great point with that. Part of what I learned the other day is how many different ways abusers are stalking, using cyber stalking, putting even spyware on cell phones. So if you have a cell phone that you had when you were with the abuser and you still have that cell phone, there's a chance that there's spyware on that cell phone. And this is just new information for me, but I'm going to pass it on. Go and get a new cell phone and do not allow the cell phone company to upload everything that's in your account back onto your new phone, because you'll end up getting that spyware on your new phone. What you need to do is make a copy of your contacts list, make a copy of whatever you need off of your phone before you pull the SIM card out of it, and then re-enter all of that in your new phone. And spyware can be sent in documents. So we had, actually the presenter ended up with spyware in a Word document that was sent to her, and the only way that she could actually get rid of that spyware was to buy her Microsoft Word program all over again. So be very careful about that. There's a website called the Stalking Resource Center, and if you just do a search for Stalking Resource Center, there's all kinds of information there. And mothers should know about that.
Very good. Yeah. And there's also spyware removal software. I also highly recommend that. Also put that on your laptop or your computer or your tablet. And regularly check for spyware removal. So another thing that I usually recommend to the mothers is to back up all the information, all your files, all your evidence on USB sticks that you give to a trusted person. And even better yet, if you have a Swiss encrypted cloud server, and I'll show you one here. I'll add it over here. That cannot be hacked or tracked. And let me share my screen here with you all so you can see what that looks like. This is one of them, Digital Safe. Again, this is safe. It cannot be hacked. It cannot be tracked. If you're worried about judicial retaliation by corrupt judges and attorneys and whatnot, then trust me, they will not be able to hack this particular cloud server storage that you can get. It's like $5 or $6 a month. You can shop around. There's several of them. Give the username and the password to a very, very trusted friend. And in case anything happens to you, all your information will continue to be safe. Very important, cyber safety. We can do an entire 2 hours on that alone. And that email account that I was talking about that I suggest to get for all protective mothers is Proton Mail. I also suggest this for the children who want to reach out to the protective mothers. They might have to do that in a secret way. Get your secure email at Proton Mail. It cannot be hacked and it cannot be tracked. And again, it's a Swiss encrypted email account. But of course, if you are phone or your laptop is has spyware on it, then the abuser can actually track your username and password. So you have to do this from a new phone, like you said, Dr. Debra, or what I also suggest the moms to do is buy a cheap tablet and buy it with cash. Don't register it in anyone's name. And then you have an identity-free device that you can stick in your purse and bring along for this types of communication. Okay, stop sharing my screen here. So you were sharing with the audience how we can get in touch with you, and we have about 10 minutes left or so. And when we did our intake, you showed me a lot of links to research that you've done. Do you want to share your screen and kind of take us through that in the time that we have left, so the protective mothers who want to learn more, or even attorneys and judges and social workers who are watching this program, can get to the actual academic research that has been done on these topics to better inform themselves to make better decisions for mothers and children?
Okay, so these are some articles that are actually available online, and what I would like to say to mothers is, if you need articles from research and you go and you find that you can find an abstract but you can't actually get it without paying for the article, again, you can contact me on my contact page. I, as a professor, have research that's been published, and so I actually have access to a website that's available to researchers that I can go on and pull articles, and then I can send you a PDF file of that article. So I will do that.
Thank you so much.
So this is an article, Beyond Witnessing Children's Experiences of Coercive Control and Domestic Violence and Abuse. And it really is very helpful in building a case to say how your children have been harmed by what they've already seen. So there's that article. There's the article by Emma Katz that I showed you earlier. This is another PowerPoint by Emma Katz on the harmful impacts of living with coercive control. So this is something she presented at a conference in 2016. There may be some things that your attorney could use in going over that. And now I need to be able to get to some of these other things. This particular article is also available online, and when we hear about, oh, men or women are just as abusive as men, I go, that's not true. The research does not bear that out. And we also know that many women will strike back or defend themselves against coercive control and abuse, but their primary motivation is not to create fear in the other person. With a coercive controller, their primary goal is to create fear and to dominate and keep that person under their thumb. So let's look at another one. And are you still seeing my shared screen or not? Okay. So this is an article on children's exposure to intimate partner violence. Should sexual coercion be considered? And again, we need to look at that whole piece. And I want to get to an article. There was actually a study.
You're talking about the Saunders study?
Saunders study. And I've got this little icon up here at the top of my screen, so I can't, I think I might know how to get to it. Okay.
If you stop sharing your screen, then I can share my screen and show the Saunders study from the Stop Abuse campaign, which is also an excellent website to visit if you want information that you can use for your own court cases. At stopabusecampaign.com, you'll see similar information as to what you were sharing about training, family courts, and the players within the family court system. You know, and we're talking about the folks with the proper right intentions who just are ignorant, and not the corrupt ones, because they're incorrectable. But if you go to the Stop Abuse campaign and you go to the Quincy Solution Saunders study, you'll see here how you can use the Saunders study in your own case. So when you click on that, it'll take you to real instructions from Barry Goldstein, who's showing how you can use this research. This will absolutely be taken seriously by the judges that you present this to. Tell us why, Deborah.
Well, the Saunders study actually showed that most judges and social workers do not make good decisions about custody because they don't understand the coercive control. And because this was a study that was funded by the National Institute of Justice, and you can actually go on and look for the Saunders study under the National Institute of Justice and provide that to your attorney, what you'll find is that this will add credibility to what you're saying to your attorney, and will also help your attorney to discredit child custody evaluations. And something that has just come out, I know everyone just balks when they hear about AFCC, the Association for Family and Conciliation Courts. And I've tried to decide whether I should join them to be a mole in their and see what's going on. But so far I've been able to just lurk around on their site. But it took 5 years working with the National Council of Juvenile Family Court Judges and the Battered Women's Justice Project to come up with guidelines for how custody evaluators are supposed to assess for intimate partner violence. So you can actually go on and read those guidelines. Now, in talking with one of the individuals who was on that group that developed that, one of the things that she said to me that I thought was very, very important was that you want your attorney to be able to go back in and actually discredit the report because the expert did not use these guidelines. And the hope would be that the guidelines would actually be adopted and used by the experts, but in the short term, we can't really expect that. So what we want to do is have the attorney ask the client, or if you're pro se, asking the expert, did they use these guidelines? And if they didn't, then you can talk in your testimony about all the ways that they missed certain pieces because they did not use those guidelines. So we've got a tool, and we've also got a suggested way to use that tool to hold experts accountable for that. And there's a group that has formed from the Institute on Violence, Abuse, and Trauma out in California that has a conference every year, and that's the National Partnership to End Interpersonal Violence. And they were a very big supporters and involved in making this process occur and holding AFCC accountable for what they're doing in cases of intimate partner violence and what happens to children.
Excellent point to close our interview with. The AFCC needs to be audited. We need to look at the federal funding of fathers' rights within the AFCC, because that's causing a lot of the protective mothers and their children to be in the situations that we're in today. So wonderful way to come full circle with our topic today. So thank you, Dr. Debra Wingfield, for being on Hell is for Children today and sharing that research and sharing this wonderful information that you had for us today, and for offering your services to protective mothers to contact you pro bono. It's just absolutely wonderful. And we now know how to get in touch with you if we want or if we need more academic research to help us with our cases, or any types of other support that you're offering also when we finally do reunite again with our children, hopefully sooner rather than later. And here we are at your website, House of Peace. You're sharing your screen. We can see your email inbox as well. I don't think we want to see that, but we see a part of your website here, your contact page. So now we know how to get in touch with you, and I think the work that you're doing is crucial. So thank you very much for everything that you do for us. We need more of you all across the country and really all across the world. Mm-hmm. So if you stop sharing your screen, I can thank you for the interview, and also share that I'm hoping to work with you in the future. And like I said, maybe possibly do some webinars with CCN TV. That would be wonderful. As educational opportunities as well. So thank you. And
welcome, and it's been my pleasure to be here.
And thanks everybody for watching another episode of Hell is for Children. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you join me again next week.